All the time our lives are full of choices. Being responsible involves making the right choices every time, and sometimes under the most difficult of circumstances. Sooner or later, the choices we have and the decisions we make will have an effect upon those around us. This is because our thoughts and actions have a ripple effect on the decisions that we make. So get this, friend. Our responsibility for the decision we make begins at the inception of our thinking the thought, not at the time of the action. Our passage today focuses upon 4 leprous men, their attitude and their change of heart that they have. These men stayed at the entrance of the gate because they were not welcome in the city. Their leprous condition made them outcasts and untouchables. Have you ever felt unwelcome? Do you remember how this made you feel? Then you have an idea of how they were feeling. Personally, I think the worst aspect of leprosy has to be the isolation that went with it. Leviticus 13:45 and 46 reveals that God commands that the lepers be isolated because of their highly contagious nature of the disease. So just for a moment, imagine being a leper. Imagine being taken away from your family, your children, never to see them again. Imagine hearing your parents have died. You weren't there because you couldn't get near them. Or imagine losing everything you'd worked to build up for years. If any group ever had a right to be down on life, it was these 4 men. These men are between a rock and a hard place. You see, the backdrop here is that the city has been under siege for ages. 2 Kings 6:25 gives us an insight into how desperate things were for those facing starvation in the city. Verse 25 says, "So there was a great famine in Samaria. Indeed, they besieged the city so long that a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver, and a quarter cab of dove's dung sold for 5 shekels of silver. As the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried out to him, 'Help me, my lord the king.'" Now, when you and I arrive at the crossroads, you and I can't stay there humming and ahhing. Along the way, we needed to have made a decision about the direction we want to travel in. The men in our passage asked, "Why are we sitting here until we die?" Their reasoning is absolutely perfect. They'd soon die from the famine if they stayed by the city. If any food became available, they'd probably be the last to receive it. So they decided that their chances were better if they surrendered to the Syrians. Spurgeon once said, "Now you perceive that there are just 2 courses open to you. You can sit still, but then you know that you must perish. Or you can go to Christ, and your fear is that you will perish then. Yet you can but die if you go to him, and he rejects you. Whereas if you do not go to him, you must surely perish." These 4 men had come to the end of their food supply. Have you been there? Have you come to the end? All that you had is gone. There's no need to choose now between heating and eating. It's all gone. There's nothing for the electric. There's nothing for the gas. You're not even running on vapor anymore. There's nothing left. Absolutely nothing left to give. Everything you had is gone. Friends, this is one of those times that you need to know how special you are to God and that you are never alone. The 4 lepers say, if we stay here, we're going to die. There's no sense going into Samaria. They're starving there. So they can't give us any food in there anyhow. Let's go over to the camp of the Syrians. And if they kill us, we haven't lost a thing because we're going to die anyway. But it's just possible that they'll have mercy on us and give us a crust of bread. So these 4 guys were taking a venture in faith. But it's on their philosophy that you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. Their only hope is that the Syrians might feed them. And so they head towards the camp of the Syrians. Now friends, our hope is in Christ. Perhaps today you have a dilemma. The life you live has brought you to several doorways and they're all shut. Maybe it's the doorway to your marriage. Maybe it's the doorway to your career. Maybe it's the doorway that concerns your health or a doorway to your past. The place you find yourself in declares you are most definitely between a rock and a hard place. Whichever way you choose, someone is going to be hurt. In the door to your future, well, if you approach that with a mindset that Christ must forgive you because of the balance of good works, then you're going to die. If you approach him with your righteousness, you're doomed. But if you approach him seeking his righteousness, then with a change of heart, with a change of mindset, with a change of direction, and taking responsibility for your actions, he will offer you life. Eternal life. Not without him, but with him. Friend, there'll still be consequences for your actions, but your eternal salvation is now assured. When the men had come to the outskirts of the Syrian camp, to their surprise, no one was there. This huge army that had surrounded the city of Samaria for many months, the camp that had been home and the supply center for thousands of men, was empty. When the lepers came upon it that morning, they discovered an empty army camp, empty and yet fully supplied. The Hebrew word describing the outskirts of the Syrian camp implies that they came not only to the edge of the camp, but that they walked around to the furthermost part of the Syrian camp, the part away from the city. They figured this was their best chance, coming as if they were not from the besieged city and arriving at the least fortified position of the camp. I wonder, how did you come to God today? Did you skirt round a few things first? Did you go the long way round? Or did you enter by the narrow gate? My friend, when you come to God, you are welcome not as a stranger, but as a son, as a child of God. Now, Israel was powerless against the besieging army, but God wasn't powerless. How many know that nothing is impossible with God? You check out Luke 1:37. God had attacked the Syrian army simply by causing them to hear the noise of an army. Perhaps God did this, putting the noise into the air. Perhaps he simply created the perception of the noise in the minds of the Syrian soldiers. However he did it, God did it, and it happened. The same God who struck one Syrian army in 2 Kings 6 so they couldn't see what was there, now struck another Syrian army so that they heard things that were not there. When you come to God, the loudest sound is not your mistakes crying out, but rather the whisper of his voice as he says, welcome home. Come to the table and feast. In the camp, everything was left behind: food, money and clothing. Everything the men were in need of. The God of the abundance was supplying and meeting the needs, not of just a few men, but the entire city. The lepers could take what they wanted right now. As a result, the siege for Samaria was over, even though no one in the city knew it or could enjoy it. Everybody who'd gone to bed in the city that night felt that they were still in that awful place where death seemed unnervingly present. Present in the skeleton forms of the hungry, present in the ashes of desperation, yet they were as free as the deer in the wilderness, had they but known it. It was their ignorance that held them in prison to fear and to the famine. Now you may have gone to bed with all the manner of problems in your head, every one of them flooding and filling your mind to overflowing, all vying for the position of prominence. Friend, God has already released the answer to your problem, the solution to your situation, and the key to your crisis. Everything is found within your relationship with Jesus Christ, our all-sufficiency. Now when these lepers came to the outskirts of the camp, they went into one tent and ate and drank, and then carried from it silver and gold and clothing. Then they went and hid those items. And then they came back and entered another tent, and they carried some from there also, and went and hid it. Verse 8 says they returned again, and the Hebrew wording here suggests that they turned back with the idea of starting again. Now how many know it's difficult to break a habit at any time? And it's difficult to stop justifying our actions too. To another tent they enter, and again the Hebrew wording suggests it was the next tent. And they lifted the supplies there and hid them again. They set about a systematic approach to securing their personal future. Then they began to have a crisis of conscience. How many know that God gives to mankind the unique possession of a conscience? The voice of our conscience clearly directing our thoughts and emotions to what is acceptable and underlining what is unacceptable. The church, the body of gathered individuals, is the voice of the conscience to the community we're placed in. Boldly standing up for those without voices, courageously defending the rights of the oppressed, defending the poor and the needy, speaking words of truth and justice, being the ones that challenge what society says is to be tolerated, and encouraging those who are being transformed by the move of the Spirit to live the life Christ died to give them. The lepers find silver, that's money. They find gold, that's gold-coloured oil, and they went and hid it deliberately. The Hebrew wording describes it as a covering over. Isn't it strange how we attempt to hide things, to cover things away from God and to bury them deep down in the recesses of our mind? Hunger had given way to gluttony. Gluttony had clouded their judgment. Their judgment meant they were satisfying their needs and justifying their actions. They had been between a rock and a hard place. And now they hear another voice. The voice of their conscience. And slowly they interpret this still small voice that amplifies their activities and magnifies their actions. Slowly, as the dawn begins to break, they realize they have a responsibility. You see, with great wealth comes great responsibility. And with their newfound wealth, they can seek the approval, maybe even the support of the people back in Samaria. You see, for some, wealth defines power. It can seem that those who are wealthy are treated with a more courteous and pleasant behaviour in social areas such as restaurants. The wealthy seem to obtain the best table. They get a hold of the best waiters and waitresses, and they're given their orders quicker. That is the perceived power that wealthy people encompass compared to the people who are not as wealthy. They may use their wealth to become the head of a business or get into politics. The wealthier that a person becomes, it seems the more opportunities the person receives over people who are not as rich. Well, the Apostle Paul says we need to have a balance here. And Philippians 4 shares that we need to be content with what we have and when we have it. Let me tell you about a guy named Stephen. He's homeless and he's hungry. He had a gift of drawing and he chalked his pictures on the slabs of the pavement. One day a woman came to him with a box of pizza slices. Stephen thanked her for her generosity. He took a slice and ate it, and then he did something really special. He went to another homeless person, offered him some slices, and then to another. Later, back at his drawings, the woman made another appearance and gave him another box of pizza. Now, we don't give to get, but when we get and we give, God gives us a double blessing. And we find that we can't outgive the God of abundance. The lepers have a change of heart and a change of mindset, and they have a change of direction. The lepers rightly enjoyed the miracle God provided, but they also realized that with the gift he gave them, they had a responsibility to share it with others. So one of the guys suddenly stops and said, let's wait a minute, we're doing wrong. If we keep this up, in one version of the Bible says, mischief is going to come on us. For just over there in the city of Samaria, people are starving to death tonight. And if we're out here and we just keep this to ourselves and we just gorge ourselves but don't let them know, then mischief is going to happen to us. We need to go back and tell them that there's plenty of food for everybody. I once heard a brilliant analogy of sharing the gospel. The gospel is one beggar telling another where to find bread. Thinking of Jesus should change the way we approach people. We need to remember that we're not better or more deserving. We're not more humble or higher on the class ladder. I am just another beggar. There are some who think that being a Christian, you can claim all the glory of God. And that all of a sudden you have the strength to avoid sin, to live a life of glory with full satisfaction in the Lord alone. But that's a lie. I don't have the strength to avoid sin. I don't live a life that's full of satisfaction or one that's totally glorious. I sin, I cry, I yearn, I hurt, I love, I lose my cool, and I forget what a good person acts like. I'm just another beggar. Probably just like you deep down. The lepers understood that to remain silent and to selfishly enjoy their blessings would be a sin. It'd be morally and spiritually wrong. They had a responsibility to share the good news. Surgeon said in a sermon, surely Jesus didn't come to save us that we might live unto ourselves. He came to save us from selfishness. Do you notice that the lepers enjoyed the feast first before they told others about it? Well, that's the same with us. We can't properly share the good news of Jesus Christ unless we ourselves are enjoying it, unless he touches the innermost part and refreshes our soul first, unless he saves us. The men went, they turned around, they travelled back to the city they'd just come from, and since the lepers were not welcome in the city, they could only communicate with the gatekeepers. There were many people there that they simply couldn't speak to, but they were faithful to speak to the ones they could speak to. And the gatekeepers called out and they shared the news. The good news from the lepers was communicated in the simplest way possible. It went from one person to another until eventually the news reached the king himself. So what does this mean for us? It means we have a spiritual responsibility to share Jesus with other people. I believe there's 5 key elements that we should possess to becoming a person who demonstrates a spiritual responsibility. And the first of those is accountability. Accountability, accepting the result of your choices, decisions, and even your mistakes. Accountability is being true to your words. This makes you dependable. It means you're someone who is reliable. The second key is honesty. Honesty is to be open to correction and criticism because no one knows it all. There's always something to learn from other people. The third key is courage. To speak against injustice, even at great personal risk. We've all heard the saying that all it takes for evil to continue is for good people to keep silent. So courage is facing the injustice in the system that's around us and doing something to counter-effect it. Nelson Mandela said, I learnt that courage was not the absence of fear, but rather the triumph over it. Now, we won't be the most popular person in the world, but we'd have satisfied our conscience in fighting the injustice. Key number 4, believe what Jesus said in Matthew 5:11, that you're the light of the world. Every one of us emits a degree of light, and this light must be used to illuminate the darkness around us. How do we do this? By complete rejection of all that is false and dark. Every time we do the right thing, we conquer the darkness and increase our light. This is our responsibility to the world around us. This is what we do with the opportunities that life provides. You see, without your light, someone's going to stumble and someone will fall. And friend, we're all interdependent. We can't do without each other. We need to accept the opportunities that life provides to serve each other. It's only when we say the price is too high that we limit our capacity to be the light. Key number 5 is to take personal responsibility. We all have free will to make a decision. It's this ability to make the decision that lies at the heart of our responsibility. No matter how we exercise our free will in decision making, whether that's in thought, actions, choice, agreements or obedience, only the decision is free. The consequence of the decision are none. Then there are always consequences. Now you may feel you're between that rock and a hard place, but if Jesus is the rock that you've built your life upon, he's your focus, then no matter how difficult things get in life, together with him, everything becomes possible. Remember Romans 8? Nothing can separate you from the love that is in God through Christ. And just like Peter is beginning to sink in the water, Jesus will take your hand and deliver you from going under. Remember, friend, we'll all have troubles, but take heart because Jesus has overcome the world. And that was his responsibility. Ours is to be generous on every occasion, because then our generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. Friends, the decisions we make and the actions we take, they're our personal responsibility for which we are accountable. Remember that to say you have no choice in a matter or decision is trying to relieve yourself of your responsibility. And our moral responsibility should permeate every area of our life. And when it does permeate every area of our life, it will have such an impact in the lives of those around us. The lives that Christ died upon the cross